Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Melissa, and this channel is all about psychiatric drug withdrawal reactions and recovery. And it draws on my 7 years of experience in this community, as well as my own personal 4.5 year journey to recovery. And the probably thousands of conversations I've had at this point, both formally as a coach and informally, just through conversations and with people I've met over the years. And the purpose of this channel is to provide hope in what often feels like a hopeless situation and to talk about the many layers of this experience and topics that come up again and again and again. And none of it is meant to constitute medical advice. It's just sharing about these experiences. So the topic for this video is how to stay positive through withdrawal, which obviously is a pretty big topic and a pretty big deal. So before I get into it, I want to mention I am coaching again. So I offer 30-minute calls and 60-minute calls. And I talk about all of the layers of this experience. And so if you want to have a chat, I'll put my direct booking link in the description of this video. So onto the topic, how to stay positive in withdrawal. So this is obviously a difficult issue because of the level of suffering this brings on. And I know that some people have said, and I made a video about this a while ago about mindset, and some people were saying, no, it doesn't matter. Like, this is strictly a physical experience, or this is a strictly chemical experience, and so your mindset has no effect. And I want to share my thoughts on this because although it's not a mind over matter thing, it's not a psychological problem that you have. It's very real and it's very neurological and physical and mental and all of the things and chemical. But mindset, in the sense of navigating through the longevity of this, it is a really important factor. So if you look at other chronic diseases, how you perceive it and view it and deal with. So for instance, type 1 diabetes, I bring up so often. It's a permanent chronic condition that I will have to live with for the rest of my life. I've already had it for almost 30 years. And how do you play that mental gymnastics? Because a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is. It's much different than type 2. You are doing the work manually that an organ is supposed to do automatically. That's a pretty huge role and level of responsibility. And there's a laundry list, huge. Like, a lot of people think, oh, you just don't eat sugar and you're fine. But the list of things that influence blood sugar is miles long. And so you're always having to tweak how much insulin to take, how many carbs to eat, how much exercise to get, and where are my hormone levels at, and what's the weather like, how much heat am I getting, how much stress am I under, because that all makes a difference in how much insulin you give. And there's such a thing as cumulative insulin effects, and you can't stack your insulin because then you have this like domino effect, and your blood sugar can go too low, and then you develop all these complications, and that affects how your body's absorbing insulin and all of these different things. So it's a very tedious disease. And so even though it's not like I didn't take blood-brain barrier crossing drugs, and that's what gave me diabetes, just in the sense of dealing with it mentally for years and years and years, in the case of diabetes, forever. Like, how do you mentally cope with that? And so that's where mindset comes in. So it's a lot of not comparing your journey to someone else's, unless you're looking at it as, this is a success story. This is where I'm going to end up one day. That's different than going, reviewing and obsessing about all the horror stories. And this is going to be me in the negative way. And just how do you take it day by day? That's something that people with chronic disease really have to learn how to do. How do I take it day by day and not constantly be projecting into the future and looking at all of the others that have lost their legs? One of the guys I went to high school with, he just got his leg amputated because of the same diabetes that I have. And so that's very scary. So it always stings. But I always have to remind myself constantly, that's not necessarily going to be me. I'm going to do everything I can to keep myself well and to track. And if I get burnt out, it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to, unplug and all of those different things. It's a lot of mental gymnastics. And so mindset is important when you're dealing with anything chronic. So in this situation, once you start to get burnt out, you have battle fatigue. And even when you don't, even early on, when you're just scared out of your mind and you're in acute, the way that you're viewing the experience and what you're exposing yourself to is important, because I say to people, like, you have this hijacked brain that's not thinking rationally. It's very primitive, it's very fight or flight. And you're constantly exposing yourself to horror stories and terrible outcomes. I mean, how is that not going to impact you? So I'm not saying that avoiding all of that is just going to take your symptoms away. It's just looking at it as a whole. Is this going to be helping or hindering the way that I'm perceiving this and dealing with this when it's very scary and unknown in a lot of ways. So I totally disagree when people say that mindset doesn't matter, because it matters in any chronic condition, how you navigate through it. And it's not placing blame on the person like, well, it's your fault that you're not getting better. It's just, how do you deal with the all the aspects of it mentally? Even tapering, I've talked about that. We talk about tapering as just dosages and spreadsheets and having the right pipette and doing the right method, but it's so mental. Like, it's such a mental thing. Like, how do I know how long to hold? How do I know when I've reached stabilization? How do I stay on a drug that I absolutely hate but can't come off of? That's why or can't cold turkey off of. And that's why I've compared it to an abusive relationship. It's like, you can't stay and you can't go. That's very mentally taxing. So I have to acknowledge that. And I want to say too that when you go through, so say grief, for instance, you lose a loved one, you can't really go through that process alone. And you rely a lot on the other members of your family or whoever else, your friends, to draw strength from, because you're just in so much pain and so much suffering. And so I think too, withdrawal is similar. And that's why I'm such an advocate for finding the right types of supports, because I've shared that for me, or the way that I perceive it, is the sort of optimal is to have real life supports, which I get that not everybody lives with people, or not everybody lives with super supportive and understanding people. I get that. And the second type of support would be healing buddies or positive supports from other members of this community who understand firsthand what you're going through. And then also someone who is recovered, whether that's just reading success stories over and over, reaching out on a forum to someone who's recovered and talking to them. I've done that. I also had my 10-woman support group that I formed through my old channel. And we had a mentor that was healed that would come in and talk to us, whether it's a coach. I mean, you don't need all of those things necessarily to recover, but that would be sort of the ideal. And you're not meant, it is such an isolating experience. And I don't believe you're meant to go through it alone. So I've shared too before where just because, or if you're someone who doesn't have the clear, typical windows and waves pattern, a lot of what keeps you going and helps you to trust the process is relying on other people who have recovered. So I had a very long stretch where I didn't have a window. And so it's almost like living vicariously through the people who have gotten well and forcing yourself to believe that that has to be me one day. And that was how I maintained hope, because my journey was so long. There were times when I absolutely had to rely on other people and believe that I could get well. It took a lot of mental strength. Like, people will say to me, you were so strong to get through that. Like, how did you do it? And I always say to them, like, well, there's two things I usually say. The first one is, I'm very stubborn and I couldn't let them win. But also, I relied a lot on other people, a lot. And even when my own mom, who I lived with, was just tired of hearing about it, she was tired of me, tired of the suffering. That was when I drew so much support from the people, the women that I talked to. It was such a huge part of my recovery. So withdrawal often triggers catastrophic thoughts. Your brain is stuck in survival mode, constantly predicting the worst. And so I fully understand the hijacked brain. I mean, I couldn't really think a normal thought for a very long time. My brain just looped on horrible OCD thoughts, just constantly, constantly, constantly. Um, and so people have such a hard time, like, not catastrophizing, which it's understandable, because when your brain is in this state, it's looking for danger. It's trying to protect you, which I kind of hate when people say that, but it's true. And so it basically kind of lives in fear and anger. And it's really hard to rationalize and think in a clear way. And so your mind just goes to worst case scenario. And so recognizing that, like, your brain is in this state where it's really having a hard time thinking clearly. And so it's going to worst case scenario. So recognizing this pattern is powerful. And just like there was times when I had to say to myself, this is a misfiring. Like something is just going in my brain that I cannot stop. And so it was because a lot of times it was like, why can't I get myself out of this? Because I had OCD before. But it was not, I mean, it was like 1,000 times less intense. And I could use a lot of typical therapy techniques to overcome the symptoms. And I couldn't in withdrawal, especially in acute, but even really like further on, I just didn't have control of my brain. So recognizing that it was something just chemically going on and trusting that whatever was done will be undone eventually. And I don't necessarily have to, like, it's not my fault that my brain is thinking this way or thinking these thoughts. And it took the sting out of it a little bit. Um, so I would say, like, try to notice when your mind is spiraling. And I mean, again, this is hard to do because it's like you recognize it, but you can't stop it. But you can kind of reframe it in the way where you say, this is my hijacked brain, or this is a temporary state of that my brain is in, and it's not always going to be this way. I had to do a lot of that. And it was this process like teaches you so much compassion, self-compassion, and changing the way you talk to yourself, because there's a lot of anger towards self. There's a lot of um, guilt. There's a lot of regret. And so trying to change the way you talk to yourself can be a really powerful part of carrying you through this process. So I want to talk about taking breaks from withdrawal content because, I think definitely, and a lot of times I'm talking about when you're through the acute stage. And because in the acute stage, it just feels like you are just constantly in this survival mode, and it doesn't feel like anything you do makes any difference. So a lot of times it's distraction. A lot of times it's support. Like, it's just people giving you hope and supporting you through this process. So I'm talking more about a little bit further in the journey, taking breaks, because I think so even in my own support group, it was a lot of like talking about this experience just all day long. And a lot of times you just get tired of doing that. And it's like, I'm just so tired of trying to regulate. I'm just so tired of trying to um, like do relaxation exercise. I'm just so tired. And one of the best things you can do is to do something completely unrelated, because, and again, I'm not necessarily talking about withdrawal, or sorry, about acute, but when you're a little bit further along, it's, this experience consumes you. But a lot of people reach a point where they're like, I'm just so sick of talking about this, even if I'm not on the other side. And so I say, like, it's perfectly okay to just give yourself that break and just do something else. Like, even talk to the same people that you talk to normally in your supports, but just talk about something unrelated, or turn on something that you enjoy, or that's funny, or that's, because a lot of times, like, I remember always just watching documentaries early on, like that documentary Heal, that was on Netflix. And there was other ones. I think Fat, Sick and Nearly Dead. I maybe watched that one in that at that time, but it was always just, everything was just focused on withdrawal. And even then, I couldn't even really pay attention much, like in my first withdrawal, because my brain was just always looping, and in my second withdrawal too. Um, but it's just like, you just need that mental break. And this applies to other chronic diseases as well. Like, you just get so sick of managing diabetes. You're like, I just have to unplug my glucose monitor. I turn off all my alarms. I'm just so sick of thinking about blood sugars and insulin and exercise all day long, and how many carbs am I eating? And it just gets exhausting. And so you just have to shut it off every once in a while. And obviously there's different levels that you're able to do that. I mean, you can't obviously just turn off symptoms and just focus on something else, but just trying, like I said, even just changing what you already do into a little bit of a different version. Like, I talk to my supports all day, every day about my symptoms, and now we're just going to talk about something else for a bit and just laugh and try to engage in something normal. So that can be really important too. And just unplugging sometimes from screens and digital distractions and all that false dopamine. Sometimes that can be really helpful too. And staying in your own experience, recognizing that everybody's journey is different. I mean, there's obviously patterns and averages and generalizations, but focusing and staying in your own experience can really be helpful, and looking at, in larger chunks of time, how far you've come. So not in days or weeks even, but like months. Like where was I 3 months ago compared to now? And what progress have I made? Because that can be psychologically motivating and give you momentum. And sometimes you can't even conjure that up on your own. And that's why it's important to have some type of record or sounding board, people to reflect that back to you. What else? Holding on to recovery stories, super important. Talking to people who have recovered, even living vicariously through them when you don't feel like you're seeing any evidence of your own healing. And one thing that I'm big on, especially lately, just in the way that I perceive all of this when I talk to people, is trying to maintain some neutrality, in the sense that, like I said, we often catastrophize, and you go into a wave and you're like, this is never going to end, or this is worse than the last one. It must mean that I'm getting worse. It must mean that it's progressing, and kind of having this neutrality of, okay, this sucks, but I've gotten through this before, and this constant reminding yourself, and I'm further along than I was 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And just reaching out to your supports when needed, taking breaks when needed. What else can help you really maintain that positivity? And just like, this is where I feel like mindfulness and mindfulness meditation can be really helpful. So it helps you to maintain, like I said, this neutrality and the way that you're viewing things. And you just try to be more an observer of the experience, rather getting lost in the details, and just looking at your current, like where you are at today, and kind of snowballing and spiraling in that experience. And a lot of, again, compassionate self-talk. I've gone through this before. I'll get through it again. I know I'm going to get well. Visualization can be so powerful, because it, like, even with a looping brain, I would do this. I would put on music that inspired me, empowered me, comforted me, took me back to a positive experience in my life, shut my eyes, and just projected into this fantasy in my mind of where I would be when I was healed. And it just, I brought in as many senses as I could, as many emotions as I could. So a lot of times I was just bawling, and I'm like, this is going to be my reality one day. It was like escaping, even though my brain was still looping and I was still experiencing symptoms. I was like, that's going to be my experience one day. And the brain doesn't know the difference between what you're imagining and what you're experiencing. So do that. And because I've shared too, where how far my life came, and how so many of the things I never thought would be possible happened and have happened, and that I'm living now. So let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. What do you do to maintain hope and positivity? And I know that people would appreciate your perspective on this, and any tools that you have to add to this. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.